welcome to week 2. Alright, so our optional video, we're going to be looking at an introduction to our book, as well as some historical background. Alright, so starting with part 1, when my name was Keoko. So this book was written by Lindsay. You might be familiar with some of her other books. Some of her more famous ones are Single Shard and A Long Walk to Water. So this particular book, and there's a lot of different covers of it, takes place between 1940 and 1945. So what's kind of interesting about it is it looks at what Korea was like under Japan when Japan was winning World War II, and then what it looks like all the way through to the end when Japan loses World War II. So our protagonists, we actually have 2. So we've got Sun Hee, who's forced to change her name to Keoko, and then we've got her brother. Depending on your cover, he might be on the cover, he might not, is Taeyu, who's also forced to change his name to Nobu. The chapters flip between the 2 characters. This gets a little confusing sometimes. I've had students in the past who got a little confused. What I had them do is just basically make a cheat sheet with the name and then just male, female, and that made it a lot easier for them. The author, Lindsay, like I said, she's written a lot of other things. As far as this book goes, this is a pretty easy read. It's written at a 5th grade or below Lexile level, but it covers themes that are much higher. So we've got themes like violence, racism, suicide when we're talking about the kamikaze. We got very, very brief reference to comfort women that's easily missed by most students. In fact, if you don't point it out, they won't really understand when the women get sent to a factory job. Alright, so then historical background. Just some real basic stuff, give you a reminder of things you probably already learned. Before 1937, there were multiple invasions of Korea. In the late 1500s, before that and after that, we've got just this massive naval domination, piracy, all sorts of things where Japan is dominating Korea. Then in 1905, thanks to the Russo-Japanese War, when Japan defeats Russia, as a consequence of that, Japan takes control of Korea, first as a protectorate. So Korea isn't a part of Japan, it's a protectorate, but then a few years later, Japan makes it official that Korea is part of Japan. So it's not its own country, it's another piece of Japan. Japan watched European colonialism and saw itself as an educator and almost like a savior for what it believed to be Asia ruled by Asians. They saw colonialism, you got the Opium Wars, things like that, where China is just being dominated by European colonial powers. And there are some in Japan at this time who had this idea of, we can save Asia, we'll take control, we'll dominate Asia, and we will get these people that they consider to be kind of less civilized or barbaric or lacking in technology or whatever, bring them up to where they should be in the 20th century. When Japan takes control of Korea, makes it part of Japan, one of the first things they do is they send in Japanese settlers. These colonial settlers, they take control of pretty much everything in the government. They get large chunks of land. While we have all these Japanese coming in, we also have hundreds of thousands of Koreans being sent out to do work. Work in Japan, work in Japan's colonial holdings, in Micronesia, all over the place. We got lots of Japanese farmers being sent into Manchuria, all sorts of places. Anywhere that Japanese people needed workers, they pretty much send in Koreans. This was before 1937 and then after. Japan has, I forget the exact name of the policy, but it's kind of a one people policy. Their idea that we are all one people, we're all Japanese. And they come up with this idea of one people by saying everyone becomes Japanese. Everyone does what we do. Everyone acts like us. And we're going to see this with Japanese being the official language, spoken, written, Japanese art, fashion being the official styles, even Japanese names eventually being forced, more or less, on Korean people. So this idea of we're one people as long as you're us. There are going to be multiple protests before 1937, multiple movements trying to get freedom, but they're all going to be met with some pretty harsh results. Then after 1937, things get harsher. Name changes aren't officially mandated, not officially forced, but basically they were. If you wanted to be recognized by the government at all, you had to have a Japanese name. If you wanted mail, if you wanted anything, the Koreans didn't have a whole lot of rights, but the few rights they did have were completely taken away unless they had a Japanese name. Whereas before 1937, they actually weren't allowed to change their name to Japanese names. And after 1937, we see a lot of women starting to disappear in Korea. They were being taken as comfort women, being sent to brothels to service the troops. And these were often very young girls that were taken, teenagers. Some of them were just pulled right off the street, never got a chance to let their parents know what was going on. They were just shipped right out. There are some women who survived this who wrote reports about that the only reason that they think they weren't taken when they were first grabbed is because they spoke very fluent Japanese, and that's why they were spared. There are other women who weren't spared. They eventually wrote or spoke about their experiences decades after the fact. There will be underground kind of independence movements. These are going to be very, very harsh results. Death is often a penalty for these. So after 1937, things get a lot more harsh. The occupation of Korea ends in 1945 with the end of World War II when Japan surrenders. And then almost instantly we see the result, the splitting of Korea between North Korea, South Korea, with the Russians marching in through the north and Americans and the rest of the UN coming in through the south. Alright, so that's just your real basic introduction to the book. This is a very interesting book. It's going to give you a lot of good look at what life was like for Korean people when they were under Japanese military rule. The author, Lindsay, she writes a lot of this based on research, but she also uses a lot of information that came from her parents who survived this time period. So it's really an interesting book when you look at it from that point of view. And at the back of the book, you're going to find a lot of resources, at least if your book's like mine. So she's got her bibliography near the back, but then she's also got additional sources that she thinks would be useful for kids in middle school or high school. So, in fact, it says specifically, of interest to readers ages 12 and up. She's got different sources listed, different books, other things for people to look at. So if you're a teacher looking at using this book, I would maybe start by going to the very back and looking up a lot of that stuff, and then seeing what you want to do with this book. Alright, if you have any questions, just ask, as always.